Welcome everyone. Welcome to our panel for our fall faculty academic staff forum. My name is Erica Benson. I am the Executive Director of the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs. And I am delighted to share this panel with all of you today. It is artificial intelligence in research. And so we have 4 researchers from across campus who will talk to us about their experiences using artificial intelligence in research. And this is meant to be a participatory event. So I am going to encourage all of you to ask questions as well. We have a couple prepared, but we would like the audience to ask questions. And for our online viewers, we invite you to submit your questions using the Q&A function on the screen. And our wonderful graduate assistant, Matt, will read those. Matt will read those for our participants. And participants, I'm going to ask you if you could just repeat questions from the audience for the benefit of the online viewers, because the mic just may not pick it up.
Okay.
Well, sure. So without further ado, let's provide a warm welcome to our participants. And I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves and describe for us how you use artificial intelligence in your research and/or creative activity.
You want to start?
I'm sitting closest to Erica, so I'll start. My name is Robin Miller. I'm a librarian. My office is in McIntyre Library. And I use artificial intelligence sort of as a dabbler. I'm very interested in artificial intelligence tools, but mostly from the perspective of how human beings are using AI tools, particularly in their practice as researchers. So I can't say that I have intentionally opted in to using a lot of AI tools in my everyday life, but I have certainly created accounts for a lot of different free AI tools like ChatGPT, for example, and I have actively experimented with the variety of AI tools that are becoming available to both UW-Eau Claire employees through our campus Microsoft license and our Adobe license and things like that. And I'm also almost every day learning about a new AI tool that a library database company is developing and then experimenting with that to see if they work.
Hello, everybody. I am Jim Seliya, a faculty in the computer science department on campus. The way I have been using research, AI-centric research in my projects is quite heavy. So like most of my research uses some component of AI, the AI area, if you will. So I have if I could, AI has subcomponents in it, like machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, and as we have seen currently, the large language model based like ChatGPT, generative AI, not counting the AI based solutions used in healthcare and such. So some of my projects have been including healthcare, for example, and analyzing a person's speech to detect the occurrence and the types of speech stuttering. On the same line, I currently am collaborating with Dr. Tom Sutter in the communication sciences and disorders department so the focus there is on the natural language processing part of AI, where we are going to be focusing on using large language models to analyze the audio of our patients with aphasia disorder and try to find both the occurrences of aphasia and the different types of aphasia. So I will mention one more area because I don't want to take up all the time. So like one more area I can talk about is in computer science education, where I and my collaborators worked on a project to try to like pinpoint if we can find a metric to evaluate students' curiosity in their in the course topics. So like we evaluated like the text-based answers to specific questions, and we evaluate that, and we use a the propensity of exploration, like that's a metric we use to classify the student responses in one, two, and 3 levels of curiosity. So, okay, Emily.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Emily Hastings. I'm also faculty in the computer science department. This is my 2nd year here at Eau Claire. And my research area is in human-computer interaction. And specifically, what I did my dissertation research in is algorithmic team formation. So how can we use computerized tools to form teams, for example, for like students completing course projects that might perform better or be more satisfied or work better together? And how do we then give those students more control over that algorithmic process that is really impacting their experiences? So I think an argument can be made that that is the kind of traditional sort of AI, in the sense that there is some algorithm that is automating a task a human would otherwise be doing. I don't have much experience in the kind of generative AI that we're probably mostly talking about here. I'm not super enthusiastic about it for reasons I'm sure that will come up during this discussion. So I'm approaching this more from my kind of tech ethics, HCI side of things.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lena Sutter, and I am academic staff over in the music school where I run the recording studio. And I also have a background in electrical engineering. So in terms of my research in AI, this was a little bit more prior to my academic career, more when I was in the commercial sector. I was doing a lot of training of audio-based AI. So for example, one of the things that we were doing is, for something like this, you oftentimes have a microphone on a table, and sometimes there are people with papers or laptops or chip bags that you don't want to pick up on the microphone. So one of the things that I was working on is training an AI on a bunch of recordings of papers shuffling and fans in the background and chip bags, which did mean I had to take a chip bag into the recording studio and crumple it 100 different ways to get a bunch of different samples to train this AI on. So working on intelligently separating out different types of sound sources. Now that I am a lot more focused on the music side of things than the electrical engineering side of things, my use of AI is probably a lot more in the creative work sector. So this is everything from recently I was in a meeting about kind of one of these more generative AIs that is, you can put in notes and lyrics and have an AI sing for you. So if you're trying to put together a demo for a song and you need 3 vocalists, you can have 3 vocalists inside of your computer. In addition, there's things that I use as a mix and mastering engineer that uses AI to kind of give you a starting place of, what do you want this mix to sound like? All right, so we have a vocal, guitar, bass, drums. Generally, you want the vocal to be this much louder than the guitar, or you want this much mid-range in the guitar. And so there are a lot of pieces of software out there that are attempting to try and give you your starting point on your mix using AI, and then letting you tweak from there. So that's a couple of the ways that AI shows up in my work. But it's kind of every day feels like there's something new to go and explore and see how to use it.
Thank you all. So another question that we wanted to ask before we open things up to the audience members is, what are some ethical considerations for using AI in research and creative activity? So thinking about your own experiences, what are the ethical considerations?
I mean, to go off the example I was just giving of creating demos, is you can be taking a job away from a trained singer if you're trying to create these demos for, a label or whatever, just using the AI in your computer. And of course, there has been a lot of litigation happening over what can be used to train these AIs. So can that vocal AI be trained off of recordings that are just out in the public domain, or can they be trained on private recordings, or does someone have to specifically consent for their voice to be used to train that AI? And so that definitely, at this point, right, the AI isn't necessarily good enough to take the singer's job, but we're getting there rapidly. So we're trying to hopefully answer some of those questions before we get to that point.
If I could chime in a bit based on my experience on a research project where ethics, and some part of ethics was part of my research. I had a project to help a orthopedic surgeon who work with like legal cases and prepared independent medical examination reports that were then like given to the court to evaluate if a patient has a non-permanent injury or a permanent injury, mostly for insurance purposes. So like the first task was the ethical question of removing the names and all the personal identifiable information. So that project, I had done it over at UWEC. So the ethical component came to me in terms of working with IRB and completing all the specific questions. And that was my experience in focusing on ethical requirements in my research, which tends to be a bit more technical. And also, I was fortunate to be on the AI task force to develop the AI major, and there was a lot of conversation about ethics and how students should be taught ethics. So my input there was that rather than having a separate an ethics and AI course, have ethic modules throughout the different courses because I felt that each course it's an ethical component was specific to the course's goal and topics. So like for example, like in like machine learning and deep learning, we deal a lot with like data. So what is the ethical component of the validity or the source of the data and such? So
Yeah, I guess I would echo what's been said before. A lot of my concerns are about the training data that these generative models especially are using. Like, where did that come from? Many of the models, it seems like this was sort of scraped broadly from the internet with no permission from the people whose data it was. So you get into situations where you have like professional artists who have posted their portfolios online because that's how they get jobs. And these models have sort of stolen that artwork and then are putting them out of a job potentially. So somebody could say, hey, generate me an image in the style of John Doe of like a cat wearing glasses, right? And then, John doesn't need to be hired anymore because it's probably cheaper to just have the model do that for them. So that's kind of one of my big concerns. Another one that hasn't really been brought up yet is the environmental impact of generative AI, especially. So these tools take massive amounts of power and water in terms of like cooling the computers. So I was looking at some statistics yesterday, and apparently the difference between doing a like Google search for, what are the hours of my local pharmacy and asking ChatGPT, it takes about 10 times more power to ask ChatGPT than it does to just use Google. So, think about kind of how broadly these tools are starting to be used. That's a big concern in terms of not only power consumption, but pollution being generated by like the generators and stuff like that. So those are some of my big issues in terms of ethics.
So I think every profession and discipline represented here has a code of ethics or a set of sort of unifying values. In the field of librarianship, we have a code of ethics that covers things like intellectual property, privacy, and consent. And then we have growing areas of care in issues of environmental sustainability, aspects of protection of personal information and through participation and research, and then also values like accuracy and quality of service and things like that. So I think that a really important aspect of any professional code of ethics or any way of looking at the world through an ethical lens is to think about care and to think about a use case for AI in the context of harm. So what does my use of AI in, say, a healthcare setting do? What is the net benefit and what is the net harm? And having concern for harm, I think, is a really important aspect of this. But one thing that we often prize, particularly in professions where we're just really busy and overwhelmed all the time, is efficiency. And I think that an area where or a value that people have brought to the conversation about AI is, oh, well, it's so fast. It's amazing. It blew my mind. It wrote all of this stuff that would have taken me days or hours to write. And that has to be good. That has to be valuable. And thus, I'm not going to worry about the harms because it saved me all of this time. And of course, our ethical frameworks are always experiencing conflicts, right? Like there's no such thing as one single best ethic, right? But and so we have to make decisions about what our uses of AI will do and what the long-term benefits or harms or maybe it's a wash, but what the long-term impacts are going to be. And we can look at that through all of the concepts that you've raised here, and I think so many more when we think about the impact on human beings as workers who are helping to maintain those content or the server farms, analyzing data that gets fed into large language models, but then certainly also impacts on our organizations, the transparency of our uses of these tools, our data retention policies. I mean, there are just so many places where AI could play a role. There is a use case, and where we probably need to think, okay, what are we really doing here, and what is the impact of my use of this tool?
Great, thank you. Now we'll open things up for questions from our audience members. Okay, go ahead.
So, Robin, you mentioned accuracy, and my colleagues have mentioned, like, for engineering, putting in specific questions where they know the answers and they get the wrong answers, and then like ChatGPT will argue with you that you're wrong. Do you think that is something that can be addressed, especially with the generative AI, or like, is that the wrong framing, or?
Well, I guess, there are so many questions, right? And so just as almost any expert, like human expert, could be wrong about something, we should probably assume that the large language models that we're turning to will also make mistakes at some point, no matter what. And that's part of the, I mean, in a way, I think that's a feature, not a bug. Like that, it's part of it. Like these are tools and data sets that are going to continue to expand and evolve and change. But also, I think that the data that the model is built with is that's certainly something that is changeable. It's always growing. It's not just a static pool like the ChatGPT we first started using a few years ago. And so a way it's very likely to change is that more information is going to be scraped from the internet, or maybe scraped from people or authors who consent, right? But whatever the origin is, more information will go into the pool, and that is very likely. I mean, we know that will always change the answers. But I think that just as we have sort of trained ourselves to be skeptical consumers of information from, say, Wikipedia, we should probably always look at these tools and the answers that they give, and employ that same impulse to verify. I take the trust part out of it and just assume that we must verify what we're extracting from them.
Yeah, if I could add, answer the question was about if the AI says you're wrong, but your response is what you have done for a homework or whatever, right? So what to do if the AI model says that your answer is wrong? Okay, so first and foremost is that the AI model's output can be wrong by itself. So that raises the question of how to test its veracity and its completeness of the question you asked. And then secondly, there is a whole area of research right now in terms of what is the quality, what is the extent of the input prompt that you give to these, like right now, a generative AI model. So like vaguely speaking, the better the input prompt, more likely you will get a better response from the AI model. So like based on the student, how they ask the AI model, their question may have to be formulated in such a way that is not a long question, but something concise, but in a format or a form that is likely to yield a more truthful response from the AI model.
I think something else to sort of consider when we're thinking about the accuracy of the responses is any bias brought on by the training data. So for example, Dr. Seliya and I are working with a student looking at in large language models, is there sort of gender or political bias that might be brought up if someone, especially a student, would ask a question related to that? So for example, there's been studies done that show that some translation systems, when they're going from a language that doesn't have like gender defined as kind of explicitly, going into like English, it might be more likely to translate, you know, doctor as like, oh, he did this, and like secretary is, oh, she did this. So, you know, is that technically incorrect? Not necessarily, but like it's another kind of aspect of that picture to consider. Yeah.
Jill?
Yeah, thank you. I have questions about practical applications that we use here and that we face every day and sort of the ethics of using them. And two just popped up this week. One, I was at the Information Technology Commission student meeting, and they were talking about Turnitin and how Turnitin sort of detects AI. They were concerned about the accuracy of that. I was concerned about whether or not submitting student work to Turnitin is training some AI model, and do the students have any say over their intellectual property? Similar to that is the second example, which is like Zoom or Teams, I think maybe both of them, that offer that feature of taking notes at meetings. I have not used that yet because I don't know if it's ethical to ask people at a meeting to submit their intellectual ideas to training a model, and is that what's happening with it? So just using those examples of things that are in our face every day, what thoughts do people have about using them? And are there any sort of guardrails or parameters in which it's ethical or not to use them?
So if I get part of your question was, is it ethical or not to use an AI model's output as a correct response, assuming that they have the permission of the sources who have created those input data, right? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, it's more, I think, on the use of somebody's content against their will, or the ability to opt out of that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead. I have seen some progress in the from a legal point of view. Like there was something going on in California where like Governor Newsom unfortunately vetoed it. So I do see in the near future, like some kind of legal regulations that could address your question about like permission or an ethical factor of obtaining the permission or using that source without permission. So.
Until that's addressed,
Yeah.
I'd be interested in hearing how people are approaching that.
Well, so I think the point you made in your question initially, that you haven't used tools like the transcription or taking notes function in Zoom or Teams as an example. So as a meeting facilitator, you have the individual option to, ask the group, of course, do you all consent to me using this? And so people in the group, of course, have the option of saying yes or no, but if you're in a group where the people you supervise are are participating, like, do they really feel like they have the option to decline, right? And just to be very transparent here, like, Jill is my boss, but we've never had this conversation and I'm not worried about it, but I mean, it's a power dynamic, right? And that could play out in any setting. So, but then I think there's the secondary problem, which goes beyond you as the individual, which is, what is Microsoft or what is Zoom going to do with the data that it collects from those meeting notes? Mm-hmm. And is there an easy way for you as the meeting facilitator or for LTS or UW system or whoever to turn off the collection of that data or the, I guess, shooting the data into a large language model that could be utilized later? Mm-hmm. Similarly, do our Canvas and Turnitin administrators exercise the option of turning off any kind of data collection that would would send the product of student writing to a large language model that would analyze that data and use it for probably Turnitin's and Canvas's profit and not our own? I think that if you Google, like, how do I opt out of AI? there are so many articles about this and like Wired and blog posts and things like that. And it is universally really hard to figure out. And if you read the fine print, it is also very, very opaque in terms of what they are committing to do or not do. The EU has some like proposed legislation, and they often sort of guide us in thinking about this, but I think that we're in this kind of wild time where the companies that are trying to collect this data from us wittingly or unwittingly are looking for every possible avenue to avoid us opting out.
And just to kind of piggyback on that, it's definitely not only AI tools that are taking our data to use for AI, right? And that's been the case for a very long time. And so there's a lot of data that we have probably all kind of unwittingly gave up. And at this point, it seems to be that there's no taking a step back from that, right? We've kind of put ourselves in this position. But I kind of want to go back to the first part of your question too about students using Turnitin and being afraid of it being falsely flagged, because I think that's definitely a concern. And kind of these plagiarism tools have been around for a while, and they certainly do give us false information. So I think if you're using those tools as a teacher, it's also your job to have a verification step, right? So it's like, all right, your paper got flagged because it thinks that you're using ChatGPT to compare these two recordings for me. I would sit down and have a conversation with my student and like ask them to tell me about what was in their paper and how they came to some of those conclusions. But I also know that that's not necessarily possible for like very large classes, or if this starts to be kind of like an epidemic of seeing all of these things get flagged, whether it's true or not. I know my students are using ChatGPT in my classes. For the most part, they're honest about it with me. They'll be like, well, I use ChatGPT for this or use ChatGPT for that. And that's fine. We generally have a conversation about it. But I don't necessarily know how it's going to look over the next year, 4 years. What about students who are in middle school right now using ChatGPT, are they going to develop writing habits that make them sound like AI?
Mhm.
Quite possibly, because they'll be reading a lot of AI generated content. So I think it's just going to become even more of a Wild West jungle until especially some legal guidelines are put into place. So.
Yeah, I would just echo what others have said and also think about if we're going to use these tools, how might they be disproportionately affecting certain groups of people? So for example, those like AI kind of checker tools for like Turnitin and so on. Those things are more likely to flag as AI, something that was written by a non-native English speaker. So that kind of thing is also helpful to be aware of and kind of include in your whatever verification step you're doing if you choose to use those tools.
Questions?
So if somebody uses AI to create something, like the music example, what are the best practices to be transparent and disclose that? Or even a paper? If I maybe have a survey and some of those results are free response and I use ChatGPT to, like, give me the themes of these responses. How am I transparent about that and whatever that final product is? Or do I have to be?
Sure. So people are always asking librarians about citations, and so I'll just start to say that every citation style has developed a template for citing information that you get from a generative AI tool, just as one example. And so so that's available to anyone who wants to use it. And when Avonlea and I have talked to people about using like Adobe Firefly, an image generator, Avonlea always shows like how you would cite that image, like if you were putting it in a PowerPoint presentation, for example. So I think that we have a perfectly fine model for that. I think that especially like in your context in ORSP, Heather, the something to consider is that generative AI is not accepted by every professional society, or certainly every publisher or society of publishers or editors and things like that. And so so I would be really cautious in advising any researcher who to start using AI for, say, data analysis without first looking at like what are my field's professional norms about this? Do we have a statement about it? Do we have a strong statement against it? If I wanted to submit to this important journal in my field, would I be prohibited from doing so if I acknowledged in the paper that I had used, say, Copilot to analyze my data? So that's a consideration, and it's very field specific. But yeah, so
Yeah, like as she mentioned about being very field specific, like more and more, well, in our field, more and more in industries who develop software are encouraging their staff members to use code generation using AI models. And on day one of my course that I teach right now, several students raised their hand that can we use like AI models to like answer like your like coding problem. I said like I cannot control that, but my strong recommendation is that from a student's learning point of view, you need to learn the programming concepts. Why? Because whatever the AI model gives you, you have to read it and comprehend it, right? So if you're talking about in our school environment, it will vary from field to field. I mean, so.
I think in creative work, it's even a little bit more of a minefield because, for example, using like the vocal songwriting kind of AI, you can do that, you can release it, you don't have to say anything. Like there's no, it's just like using any other synthesizer or instrument, you know, I don't have to say I recorded this on a 1994 Stratocaster. I don't have to say I used the synthesizer V, which is this songwriting tool in my release. And I have my own personal doubts that would change, because in the event, or like in this case of it being a voice, you know, we'd expect that to be a human. So it's kind of surprising if it isn't, but like if I use a synthesis engine that's based on AI, that's just making me, you know, a little beep boop sound. I think it'd be pretty weird if, as I put it out, I'd have to say, I used AI to make this beep boop sound. So I think that's going to be a pretty interesting thing to see develop, in terms of if there's a distinction of AI taking the place of something we expect a human to do and AI taking the place of something we expect a computer to do.
Yeah.
There's also some cases I've seen of tools sort of mistakenly labeling things as using AI. So I think it was Instagram, for example, that was doing this, where artists would post some picture and then Instagram would slap a label on it that said, this was made with AI, and it wasn't. And so this was causing big problems because a lot of people in the sort of art world are very negative about generative AI. And so this was potentially threatening these people's careers, making people think they used the tools when they hadn't. So sort of the reverse of this problem is also relevant.
Yeah.
So we have reached the end of our time, and let's thank our panelists for enlightening us. And if you have additional questions, I'm sure they would be happy to answer them afterwards or.